Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, not only in Germany, the elections and other online tools having to do with the elections are highly popular. Today we have hit 5 million user threshold, so participation in the run-up to the EU elections is all the rage. For Germany, we have seen a much greater interest than during the last elections. And here, this topic is already mentioned in thesis 19 of 38. You can agree, you can express a neutral stance, or you can express your objection as to imposing sanctions on EU countries violating the freedom of the press in Europe. So what is the intellectual hinterland? Recently, freedom of press has been threatened by political actors and also by social media, by digital groups, and also by the economic development of the classic media industry attendant upon it, not in dictatorships far away from us, but right at our doorstep. Also in Europe, the freedom of speech, the diversity of opinions, and democratic expression of our will is threatened. When it comes to freedom of the press, we hear a lot about Turkey, about Hungary, in Russia, but also in Germany and in Austria. There are forms of restrictions, of restriction of the freedom of the press. In the last annual report, the Association Reporters Without Borders stated that in no region of the world has the freedom of the press deteriorated as much. There have been structural changes. Meanwhile, in established democracies, the freedom of the press is being threatened. This association talks about systematic incitement of hatred against journalists. Media creators act in a climate of fear, and they have to fear for their lives in some EU countries. Also in Germany, violence against journalists has been on the rise. So Germany is in a better position. It is in 13th place, but this is no reason for joy. This is not a significant improvement, but can rather be traced back to the fact that some countries are in an even more deplorable position. The freedom of press is threatened, and this is also the result of a survey of Drehscheibe. This is a survey that we issue, and the editorial board asked about the freedom of the press at local level, and the results have shown that the freedom of the press is not only threatened by censorship and dictatorship, but there are different mechanisms threatening and forcing journalists not writing the stuff that they really think, especially at the local level. We have the problem of proximity and distance. In this connection, I would like to cite Heiner Müller, who said, well, you scratch your back and I'll scratch mine. So which editor writes a critical comment about an important ad customer? Journalists always had to fight against influence coming from the outside. So increasingly we are confronted with the challenge that we are being threatened, and this comes from state institutions, from police stations. There is a lack of information coming from local authorities, and this is what an editor-in-chief told us. Local journalism has to enforce the freedom of the press rigorously. Only if local media do this consistently and courageously, they can retain their credibility and they can justify the trust of their readership and they can fulfill their role in democracy. And at the end of the day, especially at local level, in local communities, the value of free journalism, which is not subject to censorship, is part and parcel of a country that is characterized by freedom. To impart that we newspapers act as a missing link between the people and its elected representatives, but also as a body of control, is a task that we have to fulfill on a permanent basis. This has been formulated by another editor-in-chief. But there is also direct intimidation of journalists. There are physical assaults, equipment that has been stolen or destroyed. This has been reported by Reporters Without Borders. The number of physical assaults against reporters has risen. There were at least 22 cases last year, and before it was 16. Ladies and gentlemen, the freedom of the press is threatened at many fronts because also new channels come into being, like, for example, Instagram and Facebook, via which news are being propagated in an unfiltered manner. Of course, there are also very smart channels and comments, and in a complementary fashion they represent an addition to the media landscape, but not always. News are being imparted and disseminated quickly and are being contextualized and are being checked beforehand. These new news makers are being regarded as equally credible and are regarded as equivalent sources of news, and this creates bubbles and parallel public communities come into being. AfD, a right-wing political party, announced a newsroom in order to disseminate its views. Christian Lüth said it's about creating a kind of war room, disseminating our contents in an unfiltered manner. And the head of the AfD, Alice Weidel, said, "Our ambitious goal is that the Germans one day are going to watch AfD and not ARD." Any questions? Digital change and the use of the media offers the possibility to exert pressure on the media if readers incite to hatred. And we have to ask ourselves what should be reported on and what not. Now we are in Austria and Vienna, and please allow me to talk about the current situation in Austria. Imagine the following scenario. A journalist asks a politician on a very critical note, but keeps to the facts, and the politician reacts to this with a threat. This interview is being broadcast, and the politician recommends to the host that he should take a time out, find the mistake. This is something that happened in Austria. The reaction, many expressed their solidarity with journalist Armin Wolf, also Jan Böhmermann, who has made his experiences with freedom of the press. What is very bizarre is that a few hours after the incident, a very sophisticated video and advertising spot of the FPO, the Freedom Party of Austria, was broadcast showing Arminia Wolf, so the female version, the ridiculed female version at a party. So the journalist was used for cashing in politically, and this worked out because now everyone is talking about the question if the journalist has made a mistake. So the profession is falling into the trap of self-censorship. FPO does its election campaign against a TV station, according to Armin Wolf. So politics exerts influence on the propagation of information in the country and slanders and libels the media. It should have been differently. So solidarity should have been voiced from the very beginning. Journalistic action should not have grabbed headlines, but else they should have investigated the political methods of the FPO, the Freedom Party of Austria, methods that they used in order to manipulate the public. And this example shows us that it is high time that the journalistic profession cultivates and voices solidarity in order to counter the adage of divide et impera. Freedom of the press is not a matter of course. So freedom of the press needs responsible media, no matter if we talk about online media or print media, seeing their responsibilities. Media have to exert control, but they also have an obligation to deal with the freedom of the press in a responsible manner. They have to protect the freedom of the press yesterday, today, and also tomorrow. Thank you very much for your kind attention.